Wait, what happened there?
Guys, we need a check.
Hi,
we need a check.
can you
John
guys hear
Declan
us?
acknowledged we are here. We were having a little bit of a
We had a
technical
little
difficulty.
yeah, we
little
don't,
bit of a technical difficulty
Yeah.
issue here.
but we're here.
We
We're
want to
here,
make sure
but now
that
I
everything is good.
Yes.
Are we good? Somebody give a thumbs up. Somebody acknowledge we're alive. Somebody can hear us.
Can you guys hear us?
Are we just talking to ourselves? You're going to have to acknowledge somebody, anybody.
Well,
I don't care who it is. It could be a dog.
oh, Laura says she can hear us. Okay.
Okay,
We're
that's a
good.
good
You guys,
sign.
you know what? Our watchers, you guys stink right now. I
Yeah,
can't
seriously.
believe we couldn't have one person in the comment box, right? Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Declan acknowing with a
The
thumbs
thumbs
down
down.
means that he can absolutely hear what we're saying. There's no other
Hi, all.
possibility that he would ever do
All right.
anything other than that.
So we should just jump right in
Beautiful.
with her because
Everybody, you
we
got
are a little late.
Hang on. Everybody hit the like button. Make sure you're watching on YouTube. Very important. We are going to get started a little bit differently this evening because we've got two guests coming on this evening.
And we were having issues. So welcome to Monday Night Live Stream Generational Change. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter. And we both have birthdays coming up.
We do.
We're both Tauruses.
Peter's birthday's on Thursday.
Yeah, we're trying to get some.
I have a little something planned.
We're trying to get some really incredible guests for Thursday.
I have a little something
Incredible
planned.
people. Really, really great people. Tremendous people.
No.
Who is this lady coming on the show tonight? Is she a good person? I don't know. Is she a Republican?
You're part of News
She
and
better be.
Amuse.
She
You're
better be.
part of News
I
and
know. I'm
Amuse.
totally about it, but I can't wait. I have no
You're
patience.
more of the
And you
Amuse
have to
than the
understand
News.
that I come before anybody. I totally come before anybody. Have you seen the great job that my friend Frankenstein? Did you see my Frankenstein monster, Ron DeSantis? What a great job he's doing!
All right.
Incredible
Can
job.
we-
Really tremendous.
We
job.
need to.
So we really.
So, guys, in addition to our guests that we have planned, we are fortunate that we are getting a visit from somebody who is running for North Miami City Commission.
Seat 3.
Okay, C3, and so we get to meet a candidate, which is always fun. And I am from there, so I was born in North Miami General Hospital, and so that's
Lucky.
I know.
Is it still standing? Or
No,
has
well, it
been
became the
transferred?
Johnson and Wales Culinary School for a while, or whatever.
Oh, well, there
we'll
you
have
go.
to find out, but yeah. So let's meet Laura.
Laura Hill, welcome to Generational Change. I think you're on mute.
You're
now.
on mute.
How exciting. I'm so glad to see you guys and to be on your show tonight.
Well, good evening. And yes, so there's only one technical issue. It's on our side. So that's
No,
good
well,
to know.
you know what though? It happens sometimes. It just happens.
It does.
Random. So tell everyone. I mean, obviously, I said you're running for commission in North Miami, but talk a little bit about yourself. Why you know what your connection is to North Miami. Why this matters to you. Like why you're stepping up.
And hats off to the Miami Progressives. You guys did, or your group did a really great job with that postcard event the other day.
Amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
We absolutely love Dawn Grayson. She's an amazing person. I know she was, I guess, like the primary organizer of this event. And so anytime the progressives in Miami have a candidate who is running for a local seat, especially with no corporate money, you know, we definitely want to make sure that you get, you know, platform with us and have an opportunity to share, why you're running. And so please, by all means, share. And of course, it's a little sentimental being that Jen is from
No,
the
it
area.
is. And like, to me, I mean, my dad grew up, he went to North Miami High. My dad was a pioneer class of, I think 64. And so like all the landmarks, all the old things, like that is where I'm from, you know, so it does matter. So I'm sorry, go ahead, go.
Well, like you said, my name is Laura Hill, and I'm running for North Miami District 3 City Council. And just a little bit of background. I've worked in Democratic politics for about 21 years. My first campaign was when I was 19, and I worked for the Democratic Party of Oregon. And we worked for a whole down ticket for the Democrats, but it was primarily for Al Gore. So I've been doing this nonstop for years. But when my husband and I moved to Miami, we bought a house in North Miami, our very first house we've ever purchased. And we started our family here. And we have 2 boys. And when I moved here, it was more my intention to kind of slow down and raise my children. But the issues of the neighborhood and the issues of the city came up, and I jumped right in. Our first catalyst was, we bought a fixer-upper, and a lot of our neighborhood was coming back up after the 2008 recession. And so, we were just doing a lot of work with our hands, just sweat equity. And then the city wanted to invite a Walmart to come into our area, and the neighborhood got together to fight it. Obviously, Walmart has been a devastating factor in the middle class in this country. I've always despised their labor practices, and we fought it, and we were successful. And that was in 2014. And after that, we really realized how much influence we could have if everybody stays connected, everyone stays organized together. So we started a neighborhood association called Know Me Neighbors. And we started to just really get into what is going on in the city. And we were really unimpressed with the way that our money and our taxes are being spent. But not just that, when it rains here, our streets get flooded out with water and sewage.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not our sewage, but it's coming into our homes. After Hurricane Irma, my husband and I, we did a great job with our house. We immediately got all of the windows covered with shutters and things like that. But what happened is the city's manhole of sewage overflowed for 3 days straight, like a geyser. And our house was flooded 18 inches inside with sewage. And we had to get the walls cut out. We had to get some of the flooring ripped out. We had to pay about $15,000 to have the sewage actually sucked out of the walls. And the remarkable thing is nothing really has changed in the years since then that would prevent that from happening again.
Right. They've done nothing. This is a combination of class warfare and poor infrastructure. And the infrastructure problem is a massive problem.
Massive problem. And, and you can't, the way that I've learned over the past 11 years is you'll be told no. We don't have the money. It costs too much. But if you watch the city's use of spending here and taxpayers' money, we paid $2 million to host a Super Bowl party right before COVID. And we didn't get anything in return for that. And then they turn around and said, we don't have money for sewage. We don't have money for infrastructure. We don't have money for street lighting. Right. All these things that we actually need. And I think what was the catalyst for me running is that I'm just tired of our government not doing municipal governing. And we pay for we expect a return on our investment taxes for things like roads, plumbing, new pipes, good schools. When I moved here and I had 2 kids, all of the schools are unacceptable in the city of North Miami. There's a couple good ones, but there's no reason. And the city, just to clarify, the city council person really doesn't have a lot of control over the schools because it's the school board. But what I've noticed is nobody has really said, wait a second. Same thing with our roads. This may not be our jurisdiction, but the problems that derive from it are our problems. So when you have pipes overflowing with sewage, you have streets that are not being regulated, you have people doing donuts, speeding down. They seem to think that there's no solutions to the problems. But all over the United States, there are municipal governments making investments into people's lives. And that needs to happen here really badly.
Yeah, that's pretty much across the board. And what's interesting to me is that this isn't in a socioeconomic way, in a sense that the people that are on the coast, they're going to have sewage in their drinking water too, in their nice fancy buildings. So this is this is a universal problem. It's just affecting lower income people first and foremost, but eventually it's good. That's what's so amazing, that people just don't grasp that this is everybody's problem.
Absolutely. And it's so hard to watch my neighbors and people all out throughout the district. In fact, there's a part of the district that has flooded for so long that right at the beginning, when I got involved in this area about 10 years ago, I was told by public officials, don't even go in that neighborhood. Those homeowners don't want to hear from anybody because they're actually abandoning their homes. And the city ends up foreclosing on them. They're abandoning them because they flood every year, to the point where homeowners and flood insurance will no longer carry their policies. You know, the job of the government isn't to entertain us necessarily. It's to do the things that we can't do. We can't run to Home Depot and buy new pipes so that we don't get sewage in our properties. So the government needs to go back to basic government tasks and obligations. Such as the investment in the flooding and the sewage. I've been knocking on doors relentlessly for months, and I've run into at least 10 people who have had to replace the engines in their cars because the flood water has gotten all the way up into their engine when it rains. That's just not fair.
No. It's gross, and it's definitely an abuse of power. And I can't help but think of what you were saying when you said, okay, we spent $2 million on a COVID spreader Super Bowl party. Exactly. And you said, and nobody got anything for that. And here's the thing. If your city runs like our cities up here, which I'm sure it does, somebody got something for that.
Yes.
Somebody did very well by that choice. Whether it's contractors or friends. And that's the ultimate problem, is the level of corruption. And at a city level, it's kind of sad because it's where it's most apparent, and yet most people are most oblivious.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that people around here are not oblivious to it. They're mad and they're disillusioned. And having been on the support side of candidates for 21 years, it's so painful to see people not even wanting to participate in voting because they think it's either a fraud, or they think that that it doesn't matter. And that's across the board. One of the worst parts about our area is how disingenuous a lot of the electeds are, and how, they just want to play the different demographics against each other. But the truth is all of us have more in common with each other than we do with the elected officials. And because we're the ones that bear the brunt of their bad decisions. And when they did the $2 million for a Super Bowl, well, guess what? In a matter of months, they had to turn around and lay off about 300 employees during a pandemic, who probably also lost their health insurance. And had we not made bad decision after bad decision, and essentially, metaphorically, maxed out our credit cards before we even got into the jam of the COVID, which has been devastating to our community. But the residents are always the ones picking up the tab for bad decisions. And it's not that they don't know, because for years, residents have been active. We have a wonderful citizenry who shows up to the meetings, even now that it's been virtual. Another thing is, they have not returned our meetings to the public. They said after the election. Mm-hmm.
Who is sitting in seat 3 right now? Who are you running? Is it an open seat or what?
No, we had the person who's currently mayor, Philip Bieneme, was our District 3 representative. He left his seat early to run for mayor, and he was successful. And so that left an open seat. And a woman named Mary Estime Irvin took this seat. She won by 74 votes. One of the reasons our area is very upset with her, and one of the reasons I decided to run, was because we fought very hard against a Wendy's drive-through on the perimeter of our district. And when she was running, we were very active. We had T-shirts, we had yard signs. We did not want that Wendy's drive-through, because where it is would bring all of that traffic right through our residential streets that are already overloaded with traffic. Again, it doesn't really add a lot of value to the area. Somebody's making money off of it, but it's at the cost of the house, the homeowners. And so she knocked on doors and she said, I'm with the community. We will not approve this Wendy's drive-through. First second she got when she was elected, she voted for it. And threw everybody under the bus. What happened was they had to raise the land where that drive-through is going. And so all the neighbors are getting the residual flooding as a consequence. So again, here we are. We have residents who have owned their homes for generations, and they're now having all of these problems because our council person couldn't stand up to big-time lobbyists. We need somebody who will fight for the residents and make sure that we're not always at the receiving end of the I'm gonna just be frank with you, the shit and sewage that keeps coming as a factor of overdevelopment in the wrong places and lack of holding developers responsible for contributing to the upgrading of our pipes and sewage. So, you know, I knew she wasn't capable of doing it. I knew she didn't have the strength of character. And so, you know, ultimately, I decided I'm just going to run.
Laura, I'm very curious to know, one of the probably the single biggest problem we have in Florida, especially when it comes to bipartisan campaign contributions, is from big developers. I'm curious as to how serious that problem is in North Miami. It seems that on the coastline area of what is our congressional district, which is Aventura down to Surfside, especially Aventura and Sunny Isles, they cannot stop building. I'm wondering if that is a significant problem as well, because over construction, over development really gets a big problem when it comes to, you know, sea level rise.
And they pack the commissions.
Oh, yes.
They pack the commissions.
They do. And they fund campaigns to an excessive amount. And it makes it hard for people like me to compete. But we must get over that. But if we're talking about development, you know, we have a housing crisis in Miami and in North Miami, where our housing stock is very old. We don't have a lot of land left to build. And so every little tiny piece of land, they're trying to pack highly dense units in there so that developers can make money and we can add to our housing stock. But what they're not doing is making the development work for our city. It feels like they keep selling us out to the cheap, you know, the cheapest bidder, and they're not making development work for us. You know, back in the early 2000s, smart development was the key phrase. And I keep hearing my opponents and other candidates for the other council keep talking about smart development, but that's a catchphrase from early 2000. What we really need to talk about is equitable development. Yeah. Because we don't have a lot of land that hasn't already been developed, we need to make sure that the land we are, you know, earmarking for development and allowing to be developed does not come at the cost of already established neighborhoods. And they must account for their demand on our sewage and pipes. You know, when there was a housing unit being put right next to a single family home, this man had invested a lot of money into his home. The councilwoman said, no, we're not going to put a multifamily right next to your home, but guess what? It's halfway built now. And I said, how many units is it? And it's and how many toilets now are going to be flushing into our faulty, leaky pipes? And they didn't even bring it up. Developer had no idea how bad our plumbing is, because the city just didn't have any interest in forcing these people to make sure that they're contributing to a solution and not just giving us more problems.
I think this is another component of us being a right to work state, and the fact that our labor laws are so detrimentally bad.
Yeah.
Horrible.
What you basically have, and especially this is, we had a candidate for Congress, Amari Hardy, on last week, and he talked about the issues that exist up in Tallahassee. You cannot walk in the door without a major developer lobbyist basically knocking down your door. And because we're a right to work state, there is basically no way of stopping what is essentially happening here, which is they get the contract from the corrupt commissions, and there are no consequences whatsoever when if in all they fail with their building permits or anything of that nature, it's basically the responsibility of whoever ultimately now owns the land or is renting on the land, the developer.
Yep.
Free and clear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've had a dysfunctional relationship with developers for the entire time I've been here. Now, there are a few developers, well, one that I do believe is in it to do things for North Miami. But the majority of the time that I've been there, they have strong armed their way in through threats of lawsuits, litigation, and things like that. And it feels like our representatives most of the time have cowered down to that. You know, it really truly feels to me that our local government has forgotten who they are representing.
I think they get very comfortable. They get very comfortable and very complacent, and they like being the man about town. That's what, I mean, that's what it is. They like that position, and they want to sit there.
There is also something to be said for people who are in it for a career, but also to ascend the ladder. One of the things I do like about Mayor LaCava is that she actually is, I wouldn't call her wealthy, but she's independently well off. And that's less pressure for her to succumb to the pressures of being an elected representative that a lot of other people fall under the guise of. You know, you could be making 25, 30,000 a year, you become elected, and then the next thing you know, you get these unbelievable opportunities presented to you. So I'd like to know, aside from obviously becoming an elected representative on the city commission, what are some of the things you think more of the local residents could do to avoid these pitfalls that seem to be coming day and night going forward?
Well, investing the time to keep up with what's happening through city council meetings is so essential, and just making sure that you're aware of the moves that are being taken. You know, we need to kind of spend some time though regaining the trust of our constituency, because I don't think, if I can't get them to vote because they're so disillusioned, getting them to sit at one of these ridiculous council meetings that sometimes go on until 4 in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I had heard, and it's true, that in the past in North Miami, they would load the weird work up until the very end of the meeting. So, you know, most people have to get up the next morning, take their kids to school, go to work. So staying till 3 o'clock in the morning isn't really, you know, an option. But I decided I would stay until the freaking end of each meeting, just in case something was snuck in without public notice, without any kind of chance for public input. And once they started seeing me do that, literally, I will stay till the very end. Things started to get a little bit less dodgy in that way. But I'm telling you, we need to be fixing a lot of, not just infrastructure with our pipe, but infrastructure about how our city does things, because I feel like the public is being shut out. And I don't have any questions about who I'm supposed to be fighting for. I know very clearly what side of the line that I stand on.
Well, Laura, you've definitely made a hell of a case. And guys, just so you know, this is a standalone election. It is not, there are no other elections going on.
When is the election?
When is the election? Information May 11th.
Yes, and we're in week 2 of early voting. So this week, the North Miami Library, the hours are 11 to 7. There's no line. If you are in District 2 or 3, you have 2 questions on your ballot. Who do you want for mayor and who do you want for your representative? Districts 1 and 4, all they have to vote on is the mayor race. So it's literally will take you 5 minutes in and out.
Yeah.
But
it's hard though, when it's hard to get people motivated to vote for city when there's nothing else on the ballot. It's like it comes down to like really very few votes because so few people participate.
Yes, and if you guys think that this can't happen, just remember Bernie Sanders won his first election by 10 votes. So don't think.
Where can people help?
Where can people help you, Laura, for the home stretch? And you said it was from 10 to 7 p.m.
11 to 7 at the library. And then on May 11th, we'll have the election. Everyone votes at their usual voting precincts. And I need help phone banking. I need help knocking on doors, text banking.
Where can people sign up?
I can put the number in the chat. They can call me, send me a message through my website, or they can send me an email. But you can just call me direct. I'm very hands-on.
What's the website?
www.laura-hill.com. All my I just put my phone number in the chat. You know, we can do amazing things. And what I want to do is take this job back. You know, so many of our officials have been using this as a stepping stone to the county commission or just ceremonial. This job is not paid as a ceremonial post. This job needs somebody who wants to show up and work daily.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just who I am. You know, I work hard at everything I do.
Laura, we really appreciate
everybody
you coming on.
Go support Laura. If you're in North Miami, get out and vote for sure.
This has been shared in multiple Facebook groups,
as
well as on Twitter, as well as our primary channel, which is YouTube. But in terms of reaching local audiences, guys, please share this on all local Miami and even Broward groups. Laura needs help.
Yes.
When I tell you this race can be won with a couple thousand votes, it absolutely can be. So there is no reason not to get involved. You know, this is where we talk about building the foundation, and you have a great opportunity to do it here over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, and if I win, which I'm working 20 hours a day, but I have an ambitious goal to renovate the apartments on Northeast 6th Avenue. For far too long, the city has turned its back on the tenants and let slumlords control Northeast 6th Avenue. That ends with me. There is no way I'm going to allow people in the city of North Miami in the United States of America to live in housing with infestations, no air conditioning, pools that are green with garbage trucks in them, vermin. It's not okay. And so after I win, I hope anybody listening to this comes and joins me, because we're going to do something big with housing, and we're going to need to, because COVID has really caused a bad situation with housing in Miami. So thank you guys so much.
Housing and climate crisis. Laura Hill for North Miami City Commission seat 3.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited to find this. So I'll be one of your subscribers.
Have a wonderful evening. We'll be in touch.
You too. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. I think it's safe to say that, no, that's okay. I think it's safe to say that Laura is, you can tell who's BSing and who's really for it, and you can tell she's really for it. And that's the beauty.
Definitely the kind of people that we want to have.
That's true, but that again is the beauty of not succumbing to corporate special interests.
Yes.
And in the state of Florida, our primary corporate special interests are, yes, Big Sugar and NextEra Energy, FP&L, but then you really get to the local level where it's all about land development.
Okay, but now what we're doing? Now what are we doing?
What are we doing?
We're taking it to the macro level, right? So
Correct.
if we're looking from micro level, and so I want to do this just because if he's running a few minutes late, I at least want to be kind of prepared. So we're talking about basically climate justice. We're talking about its effect on the infrastructure and how big corporate interests end up throwing the most vulnerable people under the bus first.
Well, 1,000%. And let's be honest, you know, again, it's not hard to see why we have these problems. And during this particular very intriguing interview, which we will be doing, we are going to get to the meat and potatoes of why the climate movement is not going where it really needs to go, how far it really needs to go.
Well, we're addressing one of the biggest impediments that never gets talked about. So I want to just give like a preface before Nick comes on. So I watch, for people who don't know, a very wide array of information. And one of the things I watch is a YouTube show called Activism Munich. And I was watching it, and the host was doing an interview with Nick. And I'm just so, I mean, we all know that the military industrial complex has a huge impact on climate, but he really takes this to the next level of explaining every way, shape, and form in which it does that. And so then I sent him an email. I was just interested in getting him on. I just found him really interesting. So he is the communications manager for an organization called the Transnational Institute. I think it's like a progressive think tank kind of place. I mean, it's progressive policy, but and he recently, or his most recent book that he co-edited is called The Secure and the Dispossessed, How the Military and Corporations Are Shaping a Climate Changed World. And this is
That's
where
too long for a
it's
for
too
a
long.
banner.
But no, yeah, it's too long for a banner. But it's really important because, you know, we talk about it, but I don't think we see it from all the angles. So we might understand, yes, they use a lot of fuel. Yes, they put out a lot of emissions. But what about the fact that everything they're doing is displacing people and and destroying infrastructures and creating climate refugees?
I don't
and all
think that
sorts of
this
things.
could
So-
have been a better time to bring on this gentleman, if for no other reason, because you have so many things going on right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, with the big news about the divorce of Bill Gates coming up and what that's going to mean for the climate movement.
Oh,
It's
Melinda,
you know,
Melinda.
Yeah, like I said, if anybody knew how much land Bill Gates owns, oh boy.
Well, now half of it belongs to her. So
That may be very well. It'd be interesting to see what type of this is going to be the divorce end all.
I don't know.
divorces.
Bezos handled it pretty well. She got quite a nice little chunk.
Well, I think Melinda really built that foundation.
Oh, she's been around with the whole
Yeah,
time.
she sure has.
Yeah.
So,
We
Mr.
lost him.
Buxton lost stuff. He'll be back in a second.
He'll be back in
I'm
a
sure.
second. So,
There's that. There's obviously, look, you know, we've got a number of issues as it relates to the Green New Deal. Obviously, as it relates to the Paris Climate Accord, there's a very significant caveat that is not in, I think, either in the legislation or in what actually is going on with the Paris Climate Accord, because there is what you would call a very interesting caveat that is not included, which of course is the military.
Right. Well, that's what's very interesting, and we're going to talk about that because that was something that that Nick pointed out in an article that I had read of his, that in the entire, and he could tell you exactly how many pages and words the Paris Climate Agreement is. There is not a single mention of the word military in the entire Paris Climate Agreement. So basically, all of the limits and restrictions that are put on corporations and put on countries and put on governments, militaries are exempt from those restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody really even talked about that, but it's very interesting.
So Nick is having a little bit of technical difficulties, but he'll be back in a minute. So, you know, again, as we talked about, and there is so much to talk about, guys.
What do you want? Because I did go ahead and make a kind of a book cover for you based on what you had said, but if you want to save that for Thursday.
Save it for Thursday. Okay. I think also, Thursday we're going to have a lot to talk about.
And
obviously,
it's Peter's birthday.
Yeah, we're not going to address the biggest elephant in the room, which of course is Hillary Clinton.
Well, but I made you a book cover.
Hillary Clinton hasn't opened her mouth in God knows how long.
But then if you're going to do
and she then decides that what she's going to talk about is how we don't have to get out of Afghanistan. Could you even imagine what she would have done if she was president?
I have to just do it. Look how good it is.
What type of wars we might have been in? Les Miserables crony.
The miserable crones. Tales of entitled bitter women. This falls in that category. This will fall in that
I want to know.
assortment.
What I want to know is has there ever been an instance where Hillary decided to say something that was so incredible, so benevolent, like, oh, if only we had her as president. No, she comes out today and says, no, we have to stay in Afghanistan.
Again, tales of entitled bitter women. Les Miserables crones.
I almost feel like bringing out Bill right now, but I think we'll save Bill for Thursday night. You know, I really
whatever, however you want to do it. I just I've really been having fun with this. It's like a real creative element of this whole thing.
All right. Well, Bill says he needs to come on and say hello.
Bill has to, but is he coming on to defend his Warhawk wife?
Look, I don't really know what to tell you. You know, to be honest, there never really was a war that I didn't like. You know, I said it was ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, and that's why we need to go there and, you know, completely displace that country. You know, the truth is Hillary, she just wants to prove that she's a tough cookie. And I think she still is convinced in her mind that somehow she's going to become president one day.
I think she just walks around feeling angry and robbed. Like somehow, you know, this is on her.
I don't really know what to tell you. All I know is that she can't stop talking about the fact that she thinks she deserves to be president. And she thinks that if she just really talks about how much we need to be at war, and that's why people are going to like her. And
it's really not. It's not an appealing look. It's not a good look.
I didn't think for a second it was appealing at all.
I know you don't.
What do you think I have to deal with every day?
Nobody wants to know what you have to deal
You know
with.
what? You really don't want to know.
No.
I mean, after all this time, I think people are starting to have a little sympathy for my behavior after all these years. I mean, I know I ain't no innocent guy, but
all right.
Could you even imagine what it would be like to have to deal with Hillary for all those years? And now I still got to deal with her. It's absolutely ridiculous how much she really, really, really wants to go to war. You know, forgive me for saying this, Hillary, but you could always enlist if you really want war that badly. I mean, maybe you could go fight in it. I mean, no one's stopping you. Why is it that every time somebody wants a new war that they never seem to be able to find the gun or the recruitment office? It's always somebody else's kid that's got to go.
Well, yes, it's the poor people.
The poor. Well, you know,
it's
really
the poor people, Bill. It's the poor
how
people.
Would I have built the Clinton Foundation?
That's our jobs program.
If the Clinton Foundation never would have succeeded without gullible poor people.
Well,
so,
you do know. I mean, that is our jobs program.
Oh, well, you know, our jobs program, whatever creates jobs. I mean, I outsourced a hell of a lot of them with NAFTA, normal trade relations with China. So we got to come up with something. And it looks like war was a great export and an import business. You know, I think we really did an amazing job with that. But like I said, Hillary just can't seem to keep her foot out of her mouth. And I know you guys can be talking a lot about it on Thursday. I don't want to talk
about anything about Hillary's mouth.
Yeah, well,
I just have to say, John, have we heard from Nick? Like, did we hear that he was having technical difficulties, or are we just assuming that because he went off? Oh, here we go. All right. You're going away now.
And I got to go.
You are going away now, Bill. Bye-bye. Here we go. Hi.
Nick, can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I think I'm finally in. I'm sorry.
All right.
It was against me today.
Okay, so I don't know if you heard my introduction. I don't know what you heard or didn't hear, but I did in fact see you on doing an interview on Activism Munich. And it was I just thought you really did an excellent job of laying out the ways in which the military industrial complex gets around everything having to do with climate crisis, is causing it, and then planning on how to use it to then take further control. Like, it's really nefarious. And so if you would, I mean, just introduce yourself, because, you know, this is one of those things where I watch random media that other people might not watch. So
Sure. Well, thanks for the invite first, and sorry for the difficulties getting on, but I'm here. I work for the Transnational Institute and have been a kind of climate social justice activist for at least 20 plus years. And the Transnational Institute is an institute based in the Netherlands, which works with social movements internationally. And our goal is really to provide the research that will support social movements on the front lines. And so I've been particularly working on climate issues, I guess, since I lived in Bolivia for 4 years, between 2004 and 2008. It was a fascinating time because it was when the indigenous movements came to power, and brought Evo Morales at the time to the presidency. But it's also where I first became aware of, like, climate change wasn't something I knew it was coming on the horizon, but it felt like it was a bit far away. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, I was living in La Paz, and they get about 20% of their water from the glaciers. And their major glacier, which was predicted to disappear in 2020, disappeared while I was there in 2006. So I was like, heck, you know, this isn't just about warming. This is also about a water source for a major city. This is going to have a huge impact. And I ended up working with the Bolivian government on climate change, on their climate change team as media, doing some media support, and went to Copenhagen, which was there's a lot of hype around Copenhagen. It got hyped as the Hopenhagen at one point. And a lot of expectation there would finally be some kind of climate deal, and it all collapsed. Lots of great talk, but nothing actually delivered. And at the same time, I was talking to people who were involved in kind of doing military and security analysis, and they said, well, the military are ready for climate change, whether we do anything or not. So I was kind of intrigued by this mixture of inaction on one side, and yet the military quite clearly making plans for climate change. So that's when I sort of pulled this book together of people who were studying both what would be the impacts of military planning for climate change, how would that impact on people, and how would it impact on things like food, water, energy security, on migration, and so on. And the big thing that came through was very clearly was that the military is not a climate denier. There's a lot of climate denialism, whether it's the kind of overt kind or whether it's the subtle kind of saying the right things but doing nothing.
What is
the military are very clear. They know climate change is coming. Even during Trump's time, they changed some of their language. They called it, you see in the documents, they called it extreme weather. They wouldn't use the word climate change, but they continued working on climate change the whole 4 years he was in power.
Right. I mean, they're working on it from the sense of how to control the masses and fortify what the powers that be have. And they're working on it from a perspective of how to save themselves. They're not working on it from a perspective of how to best serve the mass amounts of people.
No, I mean, the Pentagon is the largest emitter of fossil fuels in the world. And it's totally tied into a fossil fuel economy. You know, the reason why does the US have 800 military bases around the world? It's fundamentally to have strategic access and strategic dominance over key resources, oil being one of the biggest one, but minerals as well, and shipping lanes. So they're totally tied into an oil economy. But I guess they have I would say three interests. One is they want to continue to secure their assets, and actually their military bases are often very vulnerable to climate change. They're often on coastal areas. I mean, most people who listen to this broadcast can probably think, and especially those on the coast, can think of a military base right down by the sea. So they're really affected by sea level rise. And they're also affected because when, for example, in Iraq or Afghanistan, the insurgents fighting the US troops were often realized that all they had to do was tackle the oil convoys, and then they would seize up the whole military. So General Mattis, one of Trump's generals, was one of the ones who talked about the tether of oil. He says we're really vulnerable by being so dependent on oil, especially for the tanks, the Humvees, and so on. So that's one of their interests, is like, and they also know that in hotter temperatures, they've got to adapt to fight in those conditions. So yeah, it's about their operations, but they're also thinking, what's the world we want to fight and dominate in? And that's a world where they anticipate a lot more conflict. So they're seeing this kind of world of fighting and violence that will erupt from climate change. They call it the threat multiplier. It will make terrorism worse. It will multiply the threat of terrorism. It'll make the wars worse. The threat of China, of course, being the big one on right now under the Biden administration. So they see the climate change as kind of fueling all those things. And they're saying, how do we remain dominant? And particularly, how do we secure the richest, most powerful interests, the corporate interests? How do we make sure we control supply lines, supply chains, resources, and so on?
As far as the output, I mean, obviously they are the biggest user of fossil fuels. I mean, there's, but they are also, there was something that you had written, I just read a whole bunch of stuff and I don't know what was what, but where you were talking about how one word that is not anywhere in the Paris Climate Agreement is military. That they were able to exempt themselves from any accountability.
And that's not an accident. For
climate crisis. And and could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that I would have never thought that or even thought to look for that. But yeah, that's quite absurd that the largest user of fossil fuels is not mentioned in the International Climate Pact.
Yeah, no, it was the elephant in the room, as the classic expression goes. They're a huge part of it, producing fossil fuels, and some of all their green talk can't hide the fact that no matter what they do, their planes especially, and their shipping is totally dependent on oil. And so they're huge amounts of oil consumption. There's one plane, I think it's called a Stratofortress, it's called, and it uses as much car oil in 1 hour that an average US car driver would use in 7 years. So we're talking like gas guzzling monsters.
Yeah.
And they can't, and that whatever there's nothing you could do to replace that right now, technologically wise. So yeah, and they clearly did not want any controls on their military capabilities. So they got an exemption, and that was fought for by the US government and a few others from the Paris Accord. But they are that some now that was in Copenhagen, they were exempted, and the Kyoto Protocol they were exempted. But there is now some reporting done, but it's very haphazard, and it generally doesn't involve oil use overseas. So some countries report the missions that their military uses domestically, but very few will do it overseas. And when you've got a US which has an empire of 800 bases overseas, and a lot of its operations working internationally, it basically means that they're exempt from anyone really looking at what they're doing.
I think it's interesting how we talk about how can we reduce our carbon footprint around the world. And one of the things that is not getting nearly enough criticism of the Biden administration, and this is the problem with, the neoliberalism of our corporate media, not just in the United States, but as the BBC, lots of different news organizations around the world. Not only is Biden not decreasing the military budget, he's increasing it this first year by another $20 billion while saying he's pulling us out of Afghanistan. I don't know about you, but that money's going somewhere, and it's going to be spent on something. Is it an invasion war in Venezuela? I don't know, but they have 25%.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, they have 25% of the crude oil supply on the planet under their soil. And they, our country
We're
wants
displeased with them.
Very much so. And sanctions only hurt innocent working class people. They do not.
So
hurt
are you
rich
suggesting
people.
we'd be better off doing like a full-scale invasion of Venezuela? Is that what
How
you're
about just leave them
suggesting?
alone and reduce the military budget? But how do we
okay.
combat? Because that seems to me to be the hardest. The hardest bridge to cross for a lot of people is understanding just how detrimental it is that we have this runaway, out of control military spending in this country. And that's only what we see on paper, Nick. As I'm sure you know, there is trillions in unaccounted money that is also involved with the military that is not on the books.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply embedded in the whole political system. And you could see that, there was one that there's, you had the withdrawal from, we don't know quite what kind of withdrawal it will be from Afghanistan, but that's really about it's a repositioning, and there is no attempt to actually scale back on the military industrial complex. And it's deeply embedded. It's deeply embedded in each, it was warned about by Eisenhower. He was a general himself. He knew back in the 60s as a president and as a former general how powerful it become then. It's only become even more powerful since. We had the end of the Cold War. There was hopes it would scale back, and yet military spending has more or less doubled, and it goes up regardless of which administration is in power, regardless of their particular tactics. And it's so deeply embedded in US politics and economics, so that the defense industry is, we have the kind of revolving doors going back and forth continuously between people who were in leading arms manufacturers, who then become secretaries of defense or assistant secretaries of defense, or just people in the defense department, and then going back out. We have the huge amount of money, and they are the biggest contributors to the congressional committees, the Senate committees. I just looked at the border industry, and many of them are actually, interestingly, this is one of the things we're seeing, is many of the same military companies that provide the arms are also doing most of the border militarization that's happening on the borders. And they actually gave about $10 million in 2020 to strategic legislators. We're talking the Homeland Security Committee, we're talking the Appropriations Committee in both the Congress and the Senate. So they're very, very strategic. They make sure, and then of course we know that in every congressional district there is some kind of military base, so that there is always the shout of jobs. So they've also co-opted various the kind of trade, some of the trade union sectors into that as well, so that any attempts to kind of scale back is really strategically hard to do. But I think we have to kind of go back to the time of and kind of repick some of the energy up that really got mobilized around the Iraq War. We had a kind of unprecedented global movement that was built at that time. And now is the time to put it forward, and we need to make those connections with other issues. You know, we've got big mobilizations now around climate, but they don't often enough talk about the military. Both the way that the military is looking as climate change as the next war that they need to fight, and therefore the excuse for more spending. And we know what that means. That means that the victims of climate change now become the threats, because they will be the ones moving. So we have to get the weapons to fight the victims of climate change because they're now threats. So it will exacerbate the climate crisis. But it's also, as you said, it's really diverting huge amounts of resources. Just imagine that 750 billion going towards a massively scaled up Green New Deal. It would transform the situation. And so we got to make those connections, and we've got to build the movements that bridge the peace, the environmental movements, the social justice movements together.
I would definitely say that the biggest issue, and what I think is a separate, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, when Jen ran for the U.S. Congress against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. If you know anything about her, she happens to be probably one of the foremost of the pro-war Democrats that exist. She votes yes on every military intervention. She is a huge advocate for intervention, regime change in Venezuela, among other places, including Syria. I think when you really get down to it, I think it really just comes down to the hooks that the top military contractors in the U.S. and around the world have in our elected officials. 3 of her top contributors are Raytheon, General Dynamics, and I believe it's either Lockheed Martin or there's
Honeywell,
Boeing.
Boeing.
Honeywell. Yes, Honeywell is the other one. Excuse me.
All fun things.
And so I think that probably more than anything else is really there's something to be said for the corporate versus non-corporate movement in electoral politics that's happening in this country. I don't think enough potential grassroots candidates lean in enough on these corporate representatives who are, if you want to talk about who they are completely captured by, it is the military industrial complex. And if you could talk on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, they're very much tied. And I think, in terms of just the kind of corporate influence, it's partly the arms industry is kind of one of the key players that is really fueling this. And so I saw it here just with my own representative here in California. He's Garamendi, and they're very much they're bought into this, both the money stream and also the interests, and they believe. And they've also bought into some of the rhetoric, I think. It was noticeable that Biden, when he just had this virtual climate summit, the second part of his agenda was called climate security. And they're now using really the military to say that because it's a military threat, this is why we should have climate action. So they're kind of dovetailing now this idea that the military can be a kind of a progressive actor in this whole scheme, and I think that's very dangerous. And I think Democrats really need to call, progressive and left Democrats need to call this out, because I see too many just saying, okay, well, the military is it's good to have them on board. If we can advance things on climate change, then let's just embrace them. But without looking at how the military has always stood behind corporate interests. I think it's Thomas Friedman. It was one who has that famous quote that behind every McDonald's there is a I think it was, I forget which military company, there's a Raytheon or something like that. Yeah. But basically his argument was that if you want to have corporate freedom and corporate profits, then it has to be backed up with the fist, with the might. So that those two things run together. That corporate expansion and corporate profits depends on the military might, depends on the fist that behind it that compose the threats. And that's very much why we've seen the two things run together. You know, globally, we've had a huge expansion of corporate trade regimes which don't benefit people, either in the US or outside. They're about driving prices and profits, and they're about driving prices down, labor costs down, increasing profits. And at the same time, we've had a huge expansion of the military. Those two things very much run together, and it's very obvious that throughout this whole, that's really since the 90s, since the end of the Cold War, that kind of those two agendas have run both internationally and domestically. So we've had a huge rise in corporate profits here, a huge rise in corporate power domestically, so much so that it's kind of created a kind of norm where you cannot challenge it, that anything that challenges the interests of profits is kind of anti-democratic. Anyone who poses that is seen as a threat. And at the same time, you've had this huge military-industrial complex emerge at the same time. So they're very much embedded together, and we have to kind of tackle them in that kind of integrated, systemic way.
I think that that's a great segue into a very important question. I think of all the movements that were sustained, especially during the Trump administration, that was on the side of actually, doing something good, especially in terms of in the environmental movement, was the Sunrise Movement. But I think the biggest problem with the Sunrise Movement, and I think it's the biggest problem that a lot of movements end up having, is that they end up getting co-opted by one of the two major parties. And once that ends up happening, you're basically finished. It's just a question of when, because both major parties are completely captured by corporate special interests at the height of them. That doesn't mean there aren't representatives who aren't fighting on behalf of the people, but right now it's a very small percentage of those that are actually doing that. So as long as we have sort of this corporate duopoly that exists, I think, and Jen has really echoed these sentiments, that the future of the change we're looking for is in a nonpartisan labor movement. How do you feel about that idea?
Well, I think I mean it's a huge systemic challenge that movements face, and I think we have to work at it at two levels. I think I don't think there's one simple. If you get out and you're just not involved in the political system and just build movements, then you can't kind of move the agenda forward politically in terms of policy. If you're in and you, like you said, there's the whole dangers of co-option. And I think movements have struggled with this right at the beginning. I mean, if you look at the kind of whole Indignados movement in Spain, where they had a huge mobilization on the streets, they built very strong movements. But at a certain point, they realized that they weren't changing everything. So then they started to form a party. A similar thing happened in Bolivia, where I was living, where you had huge, powerful indigenous movements. But it was only when they set up what they called an instrument for the sovereignty of the peoples, which was these kind of ideas of movement parties, that they started to actually started to have an impact on and eventually took power. But then the co-option thing started to happen. So there's going to be a constant dynamic of tension, I think, between movements and parties. And I think as activists, we have to kind of navigate that tension. We need to remain independent. We should never put our trust entirely in political systems, but we need to also fight battles within them at times. I think it's a complex terrain, but I don't think there's any way of just avoiding it. And I think we need to learn the lessons, from Bolivia as an example I saw, where it really started to have some transformational change, but at a certain point, the government, the political party started to take over movements and started to become more corrupt, and the movements were no longer holding the party to account. So you have to have these, I think you need, as movements, also to retain independence from the political system whilst also engaging with it. Otherwise, you'll see that kind of the corruption and also just the co-option that you talk about going on.
Yeah, I think the problem here is that in this country we have two corporate parties, which is basically one party, and they all roads lead to the same ownership of those parties, and it's sort of like this, it's like political theater controlled opposition situation, and that's the problem, is that the movements that we're seeing that are happening outside the system are having a very difficult time transitioning and penetrating into that political arena. I mean, you see a few people get in here and there. I mean, we're hopeful that Nina Turner will get in, and you'll get people on the inside that actually are true to the stuff that they were on the outside. And it's just very difficult to see that actually happening.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's, but it's, you know, it's. I mean, we're seeing also changes that have happened. I've only been in the US. I've lived in the US 12 years, and even in those 12 years, there've been some kind of. You both see the strength of the challenge that we face, and of course, Biden coming to the presidency was part of that. But you also see kind of the rise of movements, whether it's Sunrise or DSA or whatever, that are gaining strength in a way that you couldn't quite have imagined 12 years ago. So we're also,
yeah. And I'm thankful to Trump for that, actually. I said in the very beginning when it came down and I thought he was going to win, I'm like, well, he's going to facilitate the revolution. And a lot of the people that are caring about things now would have gone back to brunch if Hillary had won, and wouldn't. I mean, there's that's the silver lining, is it's sort of like, I think more people have been.
It woke people up, didn't it? Because I mean, the interesting thing about Trump is I once thought of writing a piece about the truth, or the truths that Trump told rather than the lies, because
it would be a smaller book.
Well, the interesting thing was occasionally he would say things like there was a point where he talked about the defense budgets all being responses to Raytheon. He actually said that.
He said out loud that we were in Syria for the oil. I was so pleased.
Exactly. So he says he occasionally would say truths that would unmask, and even if he didn't say them, you saw. I mean, just the fact of the border. We know that the border militarization started a long time ago, and it was. It was Trump, Obama was one of the biggest expanders of it. But it was only when Trump brought a kind of extra level of cruelty, visceral cruelty and open cruelty to it, rather than the hidden cruelty, that actually people got mobilized. I saw in my town groups that never were active, from churches to just lots of citizens just outraged, and they have stayed engaged, so there was a kind of waking up, which is something we've also got to build on.
For somebody who was born and raised in a country that has universal health care, how much of a difference do you think that would make in the United States when it comes to these, let's say, climate movements, if they weren't so dependent on, worker-based healthcare, or the fact that our healthcare system is for profit and we are the only developed nation on earth that has that? Do you see that as being one of the major impediments to having a sustainable movement here in the U.S.?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe it here. Even just my first few days, just going to going to a clinic and then having to kind of show my credit card, and then show my insurance, and then fight bills, and but also just the level of stress and anxiety it creates. Yeah. You're as between jobs at one point, and it just creates a level of stress and anxiety that's huge, and we know it creates huge levels of debt, indebtedness, and so on. And it's not just the health system; it's the whole lack of a welfare state. Just whether it's paid holidays or paid childcare and so on. But of course, Britain has also gone through a phase where the national health system has been gradually privatized. You can still get free care, but the system is now being more and more driven towards supporting private profiteers within it. And the universal services are kind of becoming cut back, so like
that's how it happened.
Become more and private. It's more and more, it's gradually happening. So it's not a one fight, and we know that, but it does make a big difference. And I can just tell you, having experienced both those systems, that this system is really, really, really messed up.
Yeah, I mean, people don't really, I think people underestimate its implications in everything else. So when you look at a country that is going to be dealing with a pandemic, and other sorts of infrastructure issues, whether they're physical infrastructure, like whatever kind of thing, sick people with poor constitution are going to not fare as well in whatever the impending situation is. So, and the other problem is because people are just struggling to live, you're not getting people that are thinking about the things like their infrastructure and noticing that, oh yes, sewage is now coming up through our infrastructure. But it's just one more thing on their plate. People are so stressed about, medical bankruptcy is cause of half of the bankruptcies in this country. So it's such a massive issue. And yet, ironically, I think it makes people more susceptible to all the problems, all the health issues and repercussions of stuff that we're having.
Yeah, and of course that anxiety fuels people who say that it's someone else's fault, and the right have been very successful at kind of targeting that in a very racially divisive way of blaming on immigrants or blaming it on lack of security and saying we need much more policing and fun. So it's that anxiety also kind of fuels an authoritarian politics as well, which is
very intersectional. I know that you had said that at one point too. It's all very intersectional, and that's why it's hard for people to, I think, wrap their heads around.
We're seeing that in Florida right now. There is no question that if Trump decides not to run again, what I call his Frankenstein monster, because he did create Ron DeSantis, he really did. He, with the snap of a finger, changed the entire gubernatorial race back in 2018.
He's sort of like the Republican Trumpy version of like Mayo Pete. He's a manufactured sort of candidate.
He was elected in his own right, but Adam Putnam,
Buttigieg was the mayor.
Well, don't compare a congressperson to a mayor
All right,
of a small town.
Saying.
But the fact that he, completely, when I say he elected DeSantis governor of Florida, he elected him governor.
He appointed him. No, he sort of anointed him, actually.
Yeah. And the fact is, a lot of the policies that DeSantis has been focusing on is very similar to akin to what an authoritarian would basically do, which is, there are certain constructs of freedom, if you will,
anti-protest legislation.
But then he does things like that, and then he sneaks in these ridiculous. He did this ridiculous sales tax. And all of that is being implemented for the benefit of big business. That is a big business tax cut that he had to figure out a way to pay for it. So he stuck in a little nice caveat. I thought that Republicans were about lowering taxes, not raising taxes. But hey, that's a whole other story. And so I think we can see these things happening before they actually happen. I really don't know if our culture is able to be proactive versus reactive. It seems to me that the biggest problem we have in the United States today is that we're a very reactive society. Like, people want to act like they couldn't see Trump coming, but you should have been able to see him coming for decades. That it was just inevitable that something like that was going to happen. They really do everything in their power to try to stave off what I'm thinking could potentially be a citizens' uprising. But as it relates back to the military, I'm curious if you think we may be on the cusp of some type of a mass extinction. Now, what that would look like, I don't know. But I do think that with Bill Gates coming out the other day and saying, and I quote, "We are not giving the vaccine formula to India," when they are going to suffer the most of the COVID pandemic. Who knows how many untold deaths they're going to suffer through dealing with this problem right now. But I'm wondering if you think that there is the possibility, if you will, of some form of a mass extinction and what that might look like.
Well, we know we're already suffering a mass extinction in terms of ecologically. That's already happening. And I think, and one of the things we looked at in my book was really that we're moving to a world of the secure and the dispossessed. And that kind of the dispossessed comes out, I think there are two parts to that. One is that people, if they're dispossessed of their land or even a safe place to live because of climate change, or because of the violence that's coming out in terms of the kind of corporate oligarchs in Central America, where they're kind of forced to flee, which is often linked to things like corporate mining. There's a whole bunch of factors that are making people dispossessed right now. And you're right, the healthcare is another part of this dispossession. I see that kind of shaping up in two ways. One is around making people, as I think it's Olufemi Taiwo, who's a Georgetown professor, talks about people being either hyper exploitable. We want people to be exploitable,
Yeah.
and creating vulnerability, it means that you can exploit them. And that's that's very much part of the whole migration movement. We want people to, we actually, corporations are quite happy to have undocumented workers in situations of vulnerability and illegality, because they can exploit them, pay them crap wages, and also just make sure they can't form unions and all those things. Or hyper disposable, as in their lives won't matter. Some of them might be killed, but more often they will die. And we see that in places like, I see it in the European Union, where basically they've created the Mediterranean as a graveyard. And people are dying just trying to leave desperate situations. And so in that sense, whether that adds up to a mass extinction, it's certainly accelerating a kind of fortress world where some people are behind fairly secure barriers, protected, and others are outside and either very vulnerable or at risk of death. And that's certainly the case. I think in terms of the Gates decision, I think what I see there is part of this corporate, I'd say, kind of mythology. I mean, even corporations or Bill Gates need justifications and have an idea of why they do what they do. And I'm sure he thinks he's doing the right thing. But it very much fits in that corporate mythology that we keep the whole structure in place, but we are philanthropic. We show our generosity, but we don't do anything that will change the rules. So he put in a lot of his money into sending money to pay for vaccines, for so on. But the moment you say, actually, the system needs to change, we need to change the intellectual property rights system, which is, of course, what Microsoft built its whole empire on, that's a line too far. And we see that going across in lots of things. So corporations are very much now, they talk about woke capitalism, but corporations want to justify themselves, and they're selling themselves as social citizens. You see them more and more in global corporate governance. COVAX, which is the way that the vaccines are distributed worldwide, is no longer run by the World Health Organization. You'd have thought a global health thing would be responded by an intergovernmental forum. No, it's a multi-stakeholder forum where Bill Gates has a seat. Now, who elected Bill Gates? No one. He's just there because he's a donor. You look at the other people on that panel, quite a few are hedge fund managers. What on earth do they have to do with health? Is there a health union worker? Not one, of course not.
No.
There are donor governments. And what they do is they create this mythology that they will roll out vaccines. There will be a certain amount, but it will be a fraction of what would happen if we had a public human rights response to the crisis. And that's what I see is going on, really, is this kind of, and we see it not just in COVID, in health. We've just been doing a bit of a survey at Transnational Institute of the emergence of multi-stakeholderism. It's the language, multi-stakeholder governance. Most people turn off. They don't know what that means. But basically it means...
I can kind of figure out what it means, but
it basically means that...
we're an oligarchy.
Basically, it's self-selected, and it's around voluntary measures, and it's philanthropic. So corporations, they set up a multi-stakeholder thing to look at child or slavery in mining. So they'll set up a forum where they'll have a mining company, they'll have one civil society representative to say that they represent whole civil society. They will have some corporate donors, and then they will come up with a solution. And that's increasingly how international governance has been done, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on health, whether it's on education. It's no longer going through international institutions like the World Health Organization or the Food and Agriculture Organization. Most of these global decisions are now being done by these bodies, which are self-selected and always come up with voluntary solutions where they look like they're doing something, and they may be doing something, but they are actually undermining an international public response, a kind of a public, one which is accountable. We can't get rid of COVAX, that no one appointed them. So they run, and yet they're the ones who've decided that 80% of the world's population, even in their own plans, 80% of the world population, they say they will not get any vaccines by the end of this year. They just say that. And it's unlikely they'll even get to 20%, because basically we're seeing that private corporations, it's not in their interest to roll out to poor countries that can't pay.
Right. This is a problem with the profit motive in dealing with a pandemic. Well, in dealing with healthcare, period. But I actually feel like this, and because of COVID, it's almost opened a window into how sick and demented our system is in this country to other countries. I know that there have been a lot more people aware just based on what's going on with the vaccine. But there was something, it was the Harry and Meghan interview, and the people in the UK were floored with the amount of pharmaceutical ads that went on during that interview. And just in general, there is this, I think, new awareness amongst other places as how demented this is here.
No, I think there was that moment in COVID where I think there was a lot of realization that it had the potential. We had something that was global. It didn't matter what class you were, you actually could be affected. In fact, it started as a rich people's disease because it was the ones flying who kind of started to transmit it. And there was a sense that, and then there were governments taking actions like even forcing corporations to produce certain materials. We had a kind of the use of the Defense Act here. There was a moment there that there was a window opened of a different way of responding to crisis, and a realization that this was a global crisis, that we needed public health responses to it. But what we're seeing is, of course, with the corporations and so much entrenched in power, they have guided the response and they've closed that window down. I wouldn't say it's gone, because I think resistance and anger is now something we have to mobilize. I think it's absolutely disgusting that how the rich countries have just kind of grabbed all the vaccines and then have constructed a response that deprives the rest of the world of a really effective response. This is a global crisis. If we were all in this together, we would have had a very different response to this. I think even back in the 1940s, in the Second World Wars, there would have been a kind of different kind of spirit of we're all in this together, and it's been closed. But we've really got to stand up and say that this is unacceptable. And in the end, it's self-defeating. It's a stupid philosophy, because if we allow the virus just to go rampant, and this goes back to your point about mass extinction, it's going to actually allow new variants to appear, and the virus will come
already
back.
happening.
Yeah.
It's already happening.
So it's really it's not just deeply immoral, it's also ultimately totally self-defeating. So, and that's why I think there is a real moment now and I think there are big campaigns right now. It's really important to express our anger to both the pharmaceutical companies who are, to Bill Gates, who's refusing any shifts, and to Biden, to say that the U.S. administration, it's no, and again, he responds with the typical corporate mythology thing of we'll send so many vaccines as a nice, generous gesture. No, we need.
See, and I think that their response would be just to put a woman in charge, or a woman of color. They'll just put a woman of color in charge of the response.
We need to say the system is at fault, and we need to change that system. Otherwise, we're going to continue to allow this immorality to continue.
Well, I look at it two ways. I think on the one hand, I think that there is going to be a straw that breaks the camel's back. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but I don't think we're far from it. I don't think people really understand how devastated this country is right now, especially from an economic standpoint. I don't think people really understand just how in debt tens of millions of people are, and what an abject failure Biden is going to ultimately be as president. I know people don't want to hear it, but it's going to happen. because there is no fundamental changes happening. And unless you are willing to fundamentally change the way things are done in this country, the only thing you're doing is putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, and that is not going to solve the problem. And then the other thing that I do think is the silver lining, if you will, if there is one, I think a lot of people are starting to recognize how the game is played and how they are being played. You know, I think it was Mark Twain who had the great line about, you know, you can fool a person. It's much easier to fool a person than to convince them they're being fooled. I think that at some point there's going to be enough people who will have their sort of come to Jesus moment and say, yeah, I've been fooled. I've been taken, and I don't want to be taken anymore. I want to do the right thing, and I want to stand up. You know, this is one of the things, as you know, Jen likes to talk about. There is no point in not trying to build bridges with people that you have disagreements with on what are known as wedge issues. I always say progressives and libertarians have a lot more in common than they don't. And what they need to be doing is finding ways to come together rather than find ways to be separated.
Well, we make everything partisan here, but the Democrats are proving over and over again that they are by no means any more favorable to any of the issues that we're talking about. So I think more people are waking up to that. What if it's a really big Band-Aid?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. I think the only warning I would put is that we're used to, especially on the left, I think we kind of predict the big crisis all the time. And sometimes it's just an unfolding, more gradual crisis that's less visible. So we don't necessarily have those. We expect the cataclysm, and actually the cataclysm is either hidden or gradual, and we're going to need to find a kind of the right places to fight. I can't predict whether we know that there are real fragilities within the US economy. I don't know yet whether that will lead to a crisis in the next couple of years. But it's obviously a daily crisis for so many people every single day. It's only at moments that hits the whole and rocks the whole system.
It affects the most vulnerable people the most. And that's where we see like the biggest intersection, bringing it back to climate justice with, you know, yes, it will eventually happen to everybody, but it's sort of like we're fighting a clock as to when it's going to happen to the most vulnerable people. And can we fix it in time before it happens to everybody? And I think that a lot of people, it's starting to reach them enough that they're seeing it. I mean, I hope so. It shouldn't require that, but unfortunately it does.
Nick, you've been in California for how long?
12 years.
Okay, so you literally were at the very beginning of what became the housing crisis here in the United States. And of course, California got hit with it as hard as any place. I do think if we find ourselves in that type of a situation again, and it's very likely that we will, that's when you're going to see a revolution in the United States. I don't think there's any way that they're going to be able to kick another 5, 10, 15 million people out of their homes without there being, you know, like the movie says, there will be blood, and there will be, because at some point you're going to recognize why this is happening. You know, you can make the argument. I think Newsom has been a mixed bag, but him being caught at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the United States with a cadre. It wasn't a couple of people. It was a swath of people without masks on.
An entourage. Why would you go somewhere nice without an entourage?
And this is a restaurant, mind you, in Napa
That's
Valley.
Why. You're not going to go there with just one person.
That's like $600 a person. I mean, the level of decadence.
It's like a fundraiser in a wine cave.
Exactly. And the decadence that these people live at, to me, whether they prove, I think this has rocked his political aspirations, because we all know or at least wants to run for president. It's really just a question of now if this is actually going to hurt him enough where he's going to have no momentum, at least in his own state. But it takes one of those viral moments for people to say, F that mother effer. I ain't putting up with this anymore. He clearly is not practicing what he preaches. And now, of course, and we all know how things go in California. Now if people think that Caitlyn Jenner is the end of it, it's just the beginning. It's going to get a lot uglier than that. But just the idea, and I still think one of the things that he has done as governor that doesn't get enough scrutiny is the fact that he had an opportunity to really do something extraordinary when Kamala Harris became the vice president. And he could have absolutely chosen a very worthy successor to take over that U.S. Senate seat, in particular, Barbara Lee or Ro Khanna. And instead, he picks one of the biggest partisan party hacks in Alex Padilla to become the next U.S. senator who has no electoral experience whatsoever. And making a move like that, to me, just speaks to the complete disconnect that these elected officials have, and the fact that they just think that the people are just going to continue to take it. I don't know how much longer that's going to happen. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think he's a classic career politician, and he will just play the game. I don't know California well enough, I don't think, to kind of know what will happen with this whole recall thing. I think there's a lot of it's a lot of disgruntlement, you know. People are not going to want the alternatives either that are on offer. So
Correct.
Quite how that shapes out, who knows? Because, you know, do you want a guy who's just a careerist, who's after himself, who's a Democrat, or do you want a kind of Republican nutcase? You know, how do you choose?
We've been making this choice for years here.
He plays, and he doesn't take a stand on anything. I mean, the classic is on environmental issues. You know, we've got a climate crisis. California likes to paint itself as green, but he does these kind of virtual signaling. He's now said we're going to abolish fracking in 2023 or 2024. We're going to end oil in 2045, whatever that means. I mean, he's not going to be in power, so that
doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change any of the policies. So he creates these things that's about trying to get it's virtual signaling.
So he's a typical Democrat.
I'm an environmentalist, look at me, but he won't take on any entrenched power systems.
No.
And that's classic. But you know, we also know that you know, against him and someone else. I mean, it was the same thing with Biden and Trump. I do subscribe to the argument that you vote for the most progressive option, but you vote for the terrain you want to fight in as well. And the fact is that at least with Biden, we can be more offensive, and we can take the offense, you know, as opposed to the defensive, trying to just fight off the latest.
The only thing I can really say as a positive for Biden is that there is a small possibility that Bernie has his ear. And if that's the case, then I don't know how you can be that optimistic about it. I think the only thing that's decent about Biden is that he's not Trump, if that's even any consolation. And really hoping that he'll even make it through halfway through his term. Yeah, and the one thing, Nick, that is also very interesting, and I think a lot more people need to pay attention to this. You know, for all the negative things that people say about Republicans or conservatives in this country, the majority of the renewable clean energy you will find in the United States are in red counties, are in red states. You can say a lot of negative things about Texas with their oil, but they have a big part of their state that focuses on renewables. And in California, you know, the massive swaths of wind turbines that you will find, especially off of Interstate 10, going through, not through LA County, but through Riverside and San Bernardino counties, those are red counties. And there are endless strips of renewable energy. I do think that there could be a environmental conservative movement in this country. But again, because we are so hyper partisan divided right now, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to get there, because while the Democratic Party has been completely co-opted by, you know, neoliberal corporatism and this welcoming influx of the moderate / right-leaning Republicans, now you're left with a Republican Party that, because they're captured by corporate special interests, they're just a party of complete insanity in many ways. That doesn't mean that that's where all of the voters are.
No, but their platform tends to reject science.
Correct.
They tend to reject science and reason.
But what's interesting is that when it comes to things like wind turbines, hydropower, solar power, they'll embrace it because it's the economically conservative thing to do. And to me, that's kind of how you have to sell things in the United States. Like, to me, the easiest way to sell universal health care is to talk about eliminating the for-profit middlemen in between you and your doctor. They have no reason to exist. They provide no benefit whatsoever. And we're at a point now where it doesn't make economic sense to stay with fossil fuels versus going to renewable energy. And I'm thinking that that could be a tremendous bridge going forward. And I do think that that's one of the areas where we can wrap on this conversation, the importance of the economic message and how that would be beneficial to evolving where we need to go.
With climate, yeah.
Yeah, I think you've got to be smart with who you're communicating with, and not fall into the partisan divide where it's not going to help actually something that radical that could be embraced by people of different persuasions. My only warning would be that I think one of the dangers of, like, especially bipartisan approaches, and particularly when it gets to the messiness of Congress, but is that there is, as soon as the Democrats, actually the neoliberal Democrats on climate are most in favor of bipartisan approaches because they lead to market solutions.
Right.
So one of the big things, like the whole thing of cap and trade, which is really just a kind of a pollution bonanza for the things, was very much pushed as a bipartisan measure. Carbon taxes, again, it often ends up just enriching the same people that you actually need to transition out of the economy altogether. And it stops, and it's also just leads to kind of incremental change that makes no real difference. It just keeps the kind of corporate siphon going, and will often end up increasing pollution in the communities most affected by oil and gas. So that's just the warning, is that, yeah, we need to kind of think about ways of kind of building coalitions, but don't ever buy this kind of that we need a bipartisan approach to climate change, because that will go in completely the opposite direction to the kind of the best parts of the Green New Deal. Because the Green New Deal doesn't say we need some little market tweaking. It says we need almost like a kind of wartime mobilization, state-led, with people, with cities, looking at a real transition and about creating jobs. That won't be delivered by a little market mechanism or a carbon tax. So that's just it's not a disagreement so much as just a nuance.
No, and it's a great nuance, and it's been a great conversation. I really do think that it's important to continue these conversations.
Where can people find this book? And I noticed that it says you're co-editor and not co-author, and so I know that it's not a typical. Would you explain a little bit like what the format is and where people can find this?
Yeah, it's I mean, if you just come to tni.org, and then /climate security, you'll find it, and some other publications looking at the military. Another one we've been doing is a lot on the kind of border militarization, and that's but tni.org is the main website to check out. And it was a collaboration. We kind of brought together people who are looking at food and water and energy, and migration, and looking at how militarization or security was starting to come into the language of everything. We hear now about food security, water security. And that's often about corporations, speculating on owning water rights and property rights, or on land rights and food rights, which they can sell at a time of scarcity, and actually exacerbates the climate crisis impact on food and water. There's big bottling companies, the Nestle's and the water companies are buying up, and just individuals are buying up huge amounts of water rights across the most areas that are going to be most affected by climate change. And so, it was a collaboration of lots of people seeing how this security narrative was entering everything, and saying that what we need is not security, we need sovereignty, people's sovereignty over those resources.
Well, our vice president had a Trump moment recently where she said, we're going to have wars for water. Yeah, you're not really supposed to say that out loud, but it's obviously so true that that's what's happening. But what we like to do when we conclude all of our podcasts is ask our guests, what does generational change mean to you? And I think that there is a very clear distinction when it comes to generational change. as it relates to the climate movement. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to what your thoughts are and what generational change does mean to you.
You mean the term or the show?
No, the term.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it is about changing our view of I mean, I think so much of these issues around, we've talked about health, we've talked about climate, we've talked about water and oil and energy is so much shaped in terms of of nations, and also about this generation. It doesn't involve a kind of broader view of internationalism. It doesn't look at a kind of our responsibility as humans. It doesn't look at our responsibility to the ecology, the broader ecology, and we're realizing how much when we mess up with our environment, we mess up with ourselves. And it doesn't consider the generations ahead of us. You know, so much. I think there's a law passed recently. I think it's in Ireland actually, which actually forces laws now to be considered, to be passed, have to consider future generation impact. So that's one thing that really comes to mind is this how do we kind of bring in a kind of generational thinking, but also kind of more internationalist, less nation state, a more public attitude. And I guess the generational change just also gives a sense to me of the hope that does lie with particularly youth movements right now, and a kind of waking up right now, as we've talked in this talk about kind of realization that this system is not sustainable, is not healthy, has to be changed. It's wrecking the planet, it's wrecking people's lives because it's built on insecurity.
Yeah.
And we need to find a different system. So
I think
that's
people
a good term.
Yep, and I think people need to start thinking on a different level.
Yeah.
They can't be thinking about these little, social media spats and stuff, and that's going to solve the problem.
This is why we have people
Yep.
like you on. I try to be as educational and as informative as we can, and bring in different things, and in a very nonpartisan manner, and things that we're all going to be dealing with. So
yeah, it's been very informative, Nick. And
Thank
again,
you so
guys,
much.
you definitely
thank you.
all the
Sorry
more
for the problems at the beginning.
No,
not
it's
at
good.
all.
So everyone, again, we're talking with Nick Buxton, and he's with TNI, Transnational Institute, and
we've got a lot
he's scouring for the book title.
Yes,
but yeah, everybody check out this book. Nick's book is available at this website.
All the more reason to support Nick's work because he is not going through Amazon, and that is something that we absolutely encourage.
Thing, yes.
Let me see.
No,
here
you
we
got
are.
it. Wait.
And here is the book title
That's
again.
in the book.
The Secure and the Dispossessed, How the Military and Corporations Are Shaping a Climate-Changed World. This is a fight against our most devastating institution that we have in the United States.
We're doing it.
It was 60 years ago where he said, we must fight back, whether sought or unsought, against the military-industrial complex. President Eisenhower, one of the best presidents we ever had, fight anybody on that one. And
I'll bring Margaret Kimberly back on, and we'll talk
about that one.
Eisenhower.
But obviously, Nick, it's
Thank
always
you so much.
It's always a pleasure also to have somebody come on who has a perspective who is not from the United States.
You just like his accent.
Well, I like anybody. Well, I'm not
It's a
Irish,
sucker.
But yes, you're part Irish.
I'm
We know,
also,
so you must be related.
But I am also very appreciative of anybody who can bring a perspective that comes from a country that has universal health care.
Well,
and education.
it's a whole different thing.
Yeah. And if you've never had it or experienced it, you'll never understand what it means to actually have it.
I don't.
Because it is bloody insane that we do not have universal education and healthcare in the U.S.
All right. Thank you so much.
Brits need to know that too, because we're losing it. And if they came to other states, they would realize
if they lose it,
how hard it
won't
is
get it back easy. And that's the problem. You cannot let that happen.
Well, that's why I think the more we help lead the world, the more that it's going to take off in other places
leading.
like it needs to. Well, we're trying to anyway.
Oh, we're leading.
But in the meantime, Nick, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the show. This is really important work. Okay,
really appreciate it, Nick. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Well, needless to say,
I told
it's
you
very
we would be a
informative.
really fun
Yes,
conversation.
no,
I
absolutely.
told you, well, this is what I do. I mean, like I sit there and spend hours diving down all sorts of rabbit holes.
You see what Jen does for the show?
This
ladies
is
and gentlemen?
I spend about 3 to 4 hours a day doing some form of research or another on issues, topics, guests, whatever. So we do have focus on Florida. We do have our Florida Bites, which I went ahead and took the
We had
liberty.
a bite.
We have a Florida Bite.
Well, it's not like you can actually do a weekly Florida segment and not have a really big screw up.
Well,
somebody who doesn't do something that's really bad.
There was, this isn't any one thing in particular, but this is sort of to mark the end of the legislative session. And so what happened is you just have to go to it. Go. Yeah, but you got to scroll it.
Oh, I got to scroll it. So
you're not back. Keep going. There we go.
Spencer Roach. His last name is Roach.
His last name is Roach. and let me tell you, people. So this is really, I mean, the legislative session is wrapping up. So we're only going to have so many of these like people that most of you probably don't know who they are, don't care, and they just look like random, douche from whatever Sears catalog. But this piece of work here, he spent, and he was ranked one of the losers in Florida politics. And I just wanted to not have his name completely go in vain. So I wanted to point out there are good roaches. So this person spent the entire legislative session fighting to lower the THC values in the marijuana, in cannabis, fighting against legalization.
Talk about a guy who's owned by Big Pharma.
And he also was extremely focused on the transgender bathroom bill. This man spent the entire session, like what he was working on was lowering THC in our marijuana and not letting transgender people use the bathroom. This is what people are electing in District 79. People, what are your priorities? He actually did. I have to get to this point.
All I can say is that the campaign ads write themselves. Your last name is Roach. Good Lord, let me run against this guy, or let me run the campaign against this guy.
But you really need to understand. He's terrible. He's terrible. I actually tried to superimpose a Roach on him, but I was having difficulties.
No, I think just the whole.
Do you like it?
Yeah.
All right. So this POS. Let me get into this here. He had become the outspoken face of the effort to lower the THC caps. But the governor made it clear he wasn't a fan of the policy, but Roach still didn't even acknowledge it was dead. This is great. It pales in comparison to the anti-transgender rhetoric that he spewed. The Lee County lawmaker spent a good chunk of session.
He's from Lee County.
Spent a good chunk of session pontificating.
And you know who Lee County is named after, right?
Okay, well, he spent a significant amount of time pontificating on what bathrooms transgender K through 12 students should be allowed to use. He even alleged allowing them to use the wrong bathroom could lead to rapes. This gentleman actually said that. So I think that when we really want to talk about why Florida bites, it's because this is what people are spending their time working on. This is what
too much time on your hands. And this is why, like I said, progressives and libertarians need to find common ground, because both of them believe in the separation of church and state.
Not this guy.
I don't give a damn what your religion is, what you believe. Get it the F out of our political system.
Florida politics suggests someone put him in a time machine and ship him to Raleigh because this kind of talk is unbefitting a member of the Florida House in 2020 or ever. Yeah, but it's just, yeah.
There is Republicans, there are Trump supporters, and then there are Florida Republicans.
Oh,
Trump
well, we did.
supporters.
It was last week or 2 weeks ago that we did Erin Grohl. She's the one who's like fixated on what women do with their uterus. Yeah. She's like obsessed with what women do with their uterus.
But for people to really understand why things are so bad in Florida is because there is when we talk about the power of the religious right in the United States, it's very powerful in Florida. Very.
Yes.
And
And I don't know what
You know.
this guy's personal motives are.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
he apparently,
I mean-
look, he's against weed and doesn't like transgender people. So really right there, that's all I need to know about him. I really don't need to know a whole hell of a lot. And honestly, if your last name is Roach and you're not smoking a J, you're gone. That's it.
Is Roach
There's
another
no
slang? I
good.
didn't even know that. Oh, good Roach.
Are
Bad
you not-
Roach.
you-
Oh,
He's been sitting here the whole time and didn't notice the graphic with the
I
cannabis
thought that
leaf.
I was only paying attention to the joint because when you were talking about THC, and I'm just thinking this dumb.
Good Roach.
Yeah.
Bad Roach. This Roach.
Well, and again,
Yes, the end of the
What-
end
what-
of the joint is the
what
Roach.
you also have to remember, guys, is that not even a lot. Just remember how slimy politicians are. Okay. I've met a lot of politicians in the state, and the slimiest one I've met, with all due respect, is Charlie Crist, and he is running for governor again. And
but I think that'll just be a disaster.
Maybe it will.
It'll be a disaster.
Maybe it will. But the fact that hey, listen, he wants to give up his seat. Let somebody who's not corporate get in on that seat. My point is, the representation in this state leaves so much to be desired, and I don't even know if this Roach even believes half the stuff that he says. He's
who
only
knows?
saying the stuff that may just be very important to the very privileged religious right
Or
people.
whoever his donors are. Who the
Correct.
hell knows? But that's not the point. The point is that is how he spent the legislative session, was
And as-
working on those two big issues.
And as you can imagine, we've got a lot of things that always seem to happen here in Florida.
We're very popular in New York.
Yeah,
We made the Times and the Post.
yeah, New York and hey, listen,
We're very
let's-
popular.
But let's be honest. These two papers, this is the natural progression of where New Yorkers are going to end up. They end up down here, and they end up reading the New York Times. And the New York Post.
Yeah, it's just
So that's a
interesting.
very big. My grandfather still reads the New York Post.
But it's
Still.
interesting. Like, we're not portrayed well.
No,
They're not really
not
like.
a good
There's not a
Florida
whole lot of
story.
Florida love coming out of New York.
no, there definitely isn't.
And so we do kind of call it Florida for a reason. But obviously the one is.
Jen does not like to, and again, I think we could probably we'll close with DeSantis, but I think that the story that is the most Florida that Florida could get is Florida principal caught on camera paddling a 6-year-old in front of the 6-year-old's mother.
Yeah, it's really. And you would look at it and think like it
That's
happened
badly.
like 30, 40 years ago, but no, this just happened. But I mean, Florida is really, we're quite popular. And then yes, we have the unrelenting push to restrict our voting.
Which is, but again, the thing about
These are the two things we're known for this week.
One last thing I want to say about the paddling. The thing you also have to remember about that story, which is very important, is the fact that this was it was an Hispanic immigrant. And she was afraid of causing a problem.
Yeah, she was afraid to
So-
speak up, but she was sitting in the room, and the principal did do that
But
to her daughter.
But again, she was smart enough
She recorded
to
it.
record it. And just like all police need to be wearing body cams, you kind of just need to have things caught on tape, because you catch them on tape. There's no.
It's just sad, but it's
indisputable.
true.
It shouldn't have to be that way. But again, who knows if this is the only circumstance in Florida?
And where was this exactly? Like, I forget exactly where it was. Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it wasn't that far north, but it wasn't exactly
Like
in
Melbourne or Vero or
something.
something. No offense to people in those areas.
No,
I'm not
but
trying to
again-
generalize, but I think that's in vicinity.
Well, a friend of the show, City Commissioner Angelo Castillo came on recently, and what he did say, which is true, is that Florida is still in a very young state in terms of its evolution, if you will.
And it's very quickly turning fascist.
It is.
So we have voter restrictions. We have an anti-protest bill. And now we have Florida planning to fine social media companies for banning politicians. Well, this happens to be like on our correct side of where we would be on things. So it does sound good in theory, because in theory, they shouldn't be allowed to ban people.
But this is also one of the reasons why DeSantis's stock is rising exponentially with with the GOP and political independence. I mean, if there's one thing I am trying to implore people to understand, especially the ones who have gotten into politics in the last 5-6 years, is you have to see things coming before they actually do. Understanding that Ron DeSantis is Trump's heir apparent, it couldn't be more clear than it is now. And the fact that the Democrat establishment Not progressive Democrats, not even, I would think, considerable amount of moderate Democrats are in favor of big tech censorship.
Yeah.
But a lot of neoliberal, comfortable Democrats are very comfortable with the idea of censoring.
They are when it serves
people
them.
when it serves their
Yeah,
side.
when it makes them comfortable, when they don't have their feeling, they don't like their feelings to be hurt. So that's the problem. But I'm pretty much a First Amendment absolutist.
But there is no question, and I am telling all of you who think that you've got ammunition against Ron DeSantis, and ammunition does exist. He is going to be able to run with this social media.
Yeah, that he's standing up to big tech.
He is going to stand up to it, and that is going to give him a massive swoon, especially with independent.
And I got to
voters.
tell you, it's appealing to me. And granted,
not a reason to vote for him.
not a reason to vote for it, and not a reason to think that it's even constitutional what he's doing. By the way, let me say
remember,
that.
the people who are really involved in politics, we are a very small part of the equation when it comes to this country. You have to put the proverbial, independent-minded thinking cap on. You have to do it. So when somebody like DeSantis is not only supporting the idea of standing up to big tech censorship, he is the first person to do it. So he is going to be able to use this as not only leverage in his reelection campaign, he will be able to use it in the GOP primary in 2024, and if he is the nominee. So congratulations for allowing this guy to take the lead on a very serious issue we have in our culture.
Yeah, but you know what? He's going to come out looking like a winner, whether or not it's a valid law. Who knows? And look, they know how to play it.
They always say the devil's in the details, but as we all know, most people only care about the headlines. And
well, this was a really good headline.
Yes. And so this headline, streams and lakes have rights, a U.S. county decided.
Did you know?
They're suing Florida.
Do you understand what this is about?
Not totally, but it is The Guardian. So I would imagine that their perspective is very neutral. It's very honest.
I mean, this is just this is just fact of what happened. So very recently, Orange County passed a law that secures the rights of its waterways to exist, to flow, and to be protected against pollution and to maintain a healthy ecosystem. It also recognizes the authority of citizens to file enforcement actions on their behalf. So it's essentially like it would call, if corporations or people, now rivers and streams have rights, as well they should. And so now this is going to be, there is a lawsuit that has been filed in Orange County against a really big developer. I'm trying to Beachline South Residential LLC, and it would destroy more than 63 acres of wetlands.
There's no beaches in Orlando.
It will destroy more than 63 acres of wetlands, 33 acres of streams by filling and polluting them, as well as 18 acres of wetlands where stormwater detention ponds are being built. So because of this new law, and interestingly, Orange County is going to be the largest municipality trying one of these types of cases. So it has happened in a few other places that are smaller. This were somebody on behalf of the waterway.
So you're saying this is actually a good thing?
It is a good thing. It's a very good thing. Now, how far it goes and what the court finds or, whatever. But I think that's really cool. It's a positive Florida thing. It's the first large municipality to try this type of
are we actually
litigation
going to potentially end the show on a positive note?
I don't know if we can do that.
I don't know. I mean,
but I was liking really that. Terrible. I feel like, okay, if corporations are people, then rivers and streams should definitely be people.
Well, that's why the thing you have to understand about the practice of law in the United States, it's not about right or wrong. It's about who presents the best argument.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So I think that's a very valid argument to be argued, is whether or not lakes and rivers are people as well.
Well, they're not people, but they are worthy of representation.
Yes,
they are worthy of legal status. They have legal standing, which is, I think, really good. So anyway, look, if anything, it'll bring a lot of attention to it. It'll hold up whatever that is they're trying to build there. And, it's a good thing. And I like it. And if it's successful, great, because that's a big municipality to succeed.
On that note, it is good to know that every once in a while, Florida, just when you think you're about to leave, they pull you back.
No, I mean, look, it is, first of all, and also look at where we're talking about, I-4 corridor.
Correct.
That is where our progressive movement in Florida has the most juice. So it's not
no question.
Right. So it's not surprising that it's happening there.
And who are the two primary representatives at the state level? in the Orlando area, Anna Escamati and Carlos Guillermo Smith. So no surprise there.
Right. So I mean, and I don't know who's what, but that if it was going to come out of any area in Florida, that would be the area.
We in South Florida,
so go streams and rivers.
Yes, we in South Florida are definitely a little envious of I-4. There's no question. You guys definitely are doing a much better job than we are. But with that said, it's always good to know that there are people fighting on behalf of the people.
And now representing streams and rivers.
Yep. There's no question, because look, water is life. We cannot continue to take these things for granted. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from this podcast.
These people just don't seem to get that they can keep dredging and digging and building,
well,
and it's not going to create fresh water for us.
But again, that's why I said the biggest problem we have in our society, more than anything else, is that we are reactive, not proactive.
Well,
if we ever became a proactive society, like putting on a yellow vest, for example.
Oh, I wish I had a yellow
That is how change is ultimately going to happen. But like I said, I do think that you can make the argument that one of the things the Biden administration will do going forward is that they're going to kick the can down the road. They're going to kick it down the road as long as they can.
You mean you don't think Biden is going to be like a champion of the people?
It's not a question of being a champion of the people. It's a question of whether or not he's going to allow the bottom to completely fall out. I don't know if he's going to allow that to happen. I don't know that he
notices either way.
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't.
It's like Weekend at Bernie's with that guy. Like they prop him up, give him meds, get him till he's all filming prior to his sundowning, and that's
no. But the only thing that I will say is, no matter what anyone thinks about what could happen if the bottom does fall out in this country again, it is way too soon post the housing crisis of only just over a decade ago, where if it happens again, there's going to be a revolution in this country. That will be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
I'm getting a yellow vest.
We are probably not that far off.
No, if they came with our cars, it probably could have already happened. That's a big source of it. France keeps it with their cars.
We do need to continue to spread the word as we have.
See, that would be good legislation to push for. Think about it. In a very sort of subversive way, you push for that all U.S. cars have to come equipped with yellow vests.
I don't know if we're obviously going to be able to get something like that.
And well, I'm just saying, it's a very innocuous way to sort of like infiltrate the mainstream without doing it as a revolution. Oh, it's for safety reasons. That's why they don't have them in France so that they can revolt. They have them in France for safety hazard reasons. That's why they come. Move. Well, we're not known to do the smart thing here. But I'm just saying, like, what if we were able to just get yellow vests in the cars?
The last thing I will say, as I said before, and this is one of the things that I will not, if Jen were to run for Congress again, I will not be her campaign manager. I will work with her, but I am not somebody who is good enough to get her over the finish line.
You're not a campaign manager.
I'm a campaign surrogate. How's that? But what I will say, and what I would advise, if Jen were to run again, you have to lean very hard into Wasserman Schultz's foreign policy record, which is atrociously bad.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can tie the military-industrial complex to the climate crisis, and it is clear as day that you can, that is one of the issues that I don't think enough candidates around the country do. Michaela Wilkes is running against Steny Hoyer. If Steny Hoyer is attached to the military-industrial complex, you charge that like a bull in a china shop.
Yeah, they don't bring it up enough. And really what it did, though, was it really opened that lane for Tulsi, because she took it on.
Correct.
And no one else ever really talks about it. They avoid it. It's like somehow you're not allowed to criticize military intervention because it's like being disrespectful to troops. They have done a very good job of connecting those two things, similar to the Israel anti-Semitic issue. There is this propaganda campaign to tie things together. So if you criticize foreign policy, oh, you're not supporting the troops. Well, the only reason we have a problem is we have troops everywhere.
And even if the argument is, well, I don't like Tulsi and I think that she's wrong on this, that, and the other thing, well, that's okay. Then just focus on what she's right.
Oh, yeah,
about.
no, I'm not. I have no connection to Tulsi. I'm just referencing she had such an opening in that lane.
But that's also that's also an argument for somebody like Rand Paul. Rand Paul is almost too far gone for words when it comes to a lot of things that he practices and preaches. But when it comes to civil liberties and anti-war, he's as good as it gets.
Well, that's why we always say these issues have to be dealt with nonpartisan. We have a lot of friends in interesting places.
That is correct. And that is the strategy of long-term success.
Which is what we're doing.
Correct.
Okay, so we should promote a little before we leave. So guys, the new website is up. Check it out, generationalchange.com.
Yep.
Also, If you're not subscribed, we've been, of course, saying it the entire time because he's obsessed with saying subscribe. But anyway, if you would like, we also have a Patreon account, and that is where we would love to get some support. We have memberships for $1 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month.
We really would like $10 a month, but you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
If you're enjoying our content,
help, because
we're glad, but we are going to be updating our format so that way we can give benefits.
Yes,
to the
we
Patreon.
are. And so that's something I wanted to talk about before we go. So starting this month, May is a big, like we're doing a lot of things. So tomorrow is First Tuesday, which is Trash and Taco Tuesday. We're doing a beach cleanup at Hollywood Beach. You can meet us, if you're local, meet us out there at 4 o'clock. We're meeting at the Park Pavilion at Connecticut Street between Connecticut and Garfield at the beach. We'll meet there at 4. If you can't get there by then, but you still want to come and you want to participate and hang out with people that are eating tacos, at 5:30, we will be at the taco spot, which is also right in that general vicinity. So that's tomorrow. And the other thing that I'm starting this month is we are going to start having a members only Patreon Zoom call. So for people that are Patreon members, you're going to get to participate in the Zoom call. And every month we're going to do something different. So it'll be a call where everybody can like give suggestions or have Q&A. We'll have that. But the first one we're going to do is going to be a special presentation that we're going to offer. And this is for Patreon members only. And this is going to be my friend Mona Lisa Weber of Probation Station. And she is also with Florida Rising. And she is going to be coming and giving a presentation on food insecurity and how that's actually connected to the whole school to prison pipeline, and how a lot of these crimes are crimes of poverty and desperation, and food insecurity is one thing that we can really do. So anyway, so May 26th, put it in your calendar, May 26th, it's a Wednesday, 7 o'clock in the evening. We're going to be having our first Patreon Zoom call. And we will sometime between now and then work out, making sure to email everybody their link. So if you're a Patreon member, you'll be getting a link to our Zoom meeting. And yeah, feel free to jump on. We're going to, and I'll try to do them around the same time every month. This was, we really needed to work around Mo's schedule for this, but she does an amazing
pipeline. What's it called again?
School to prison pipeline. It's just a matter of basically it's very intersectional, but Mo does several really good presentations. I asked her to pick her favorite one that she does, and this was the one that she wants to do. So we're going to do that. And I'm going to plan on that every month. If you're a Patreon member, you will get a special Zoom call where you can call in. We'll be sitting here like this. You can ask questions and have suggestions. It'll almost be like a general meeting of sorts. And then hopefully always have a really good presentation. I'm going to do my best to have some good stuff. And it'll be just for members. So that's not going to be something that we do on the live stream. And I just wanted to offer something special to members. So if you do decide to join, you have a few weeks between now and our first Zoom meeting.
Yes, and what level are we making it for that you'll be able to get on the Zoom?
I think it's a 5 and 10. 5 and 10. I think 5 and 10 is reasonable. The people, and I am thankful for people that want to support, and even if it's $1 or even if it's $3, I am so appreciative. But we do need to offer certain incentive.
If you would like the baseball style generational change T-shirt,
yes, and we're ordering more shirts.
Yes.
These shirts again, we never. We could if we had a merch store, but these are really our volunteer shirts. If you're local and you come out to volunteer with us, you get a T-shirt. You get a Gen Core T-shirt.
Absolutely.
$10 members, you can have the jersey, and we do have hemp bracelets for $5 and up. John, can you check and make sure we're current? That I feel like I haven't done a mail out in a while. And I can't tell you the last person I mailed to because that's pot brain and I just can't. So John, if you would, let me know who needs things. And we're going to reorder shirts.
We are working on a big tech censorship event, but our next big event is obviously going to be Jen's 50th birthday.
My 50th birthday.
Next Thursday. That's 10 days from now. We are going to be having a lot of interesting guests.
The
not going to say who.
No, it's not going to be who. And some of them will be people that are personal friends. So basically, we're going to be having a 3-hour online cocktail party with presentations, performances, different types of things.
Correct.
It's going to be fun. So we'll be doing live stream, but we're going to do it an hour later than usual. He has this nostalgic thing about making it to midnight so that it's actually my birthday. So on May 13th, our live stream will be 9 to 12. It'll be like a variety show. Similar to what we did with our Assange live stream, but much less structured and a lot more just casual. And there hopefully will be some special fun guests. And I'm going to have some personal guests. I'm going to get my parents on here. We'll have to do
That'll
them
be
on
cute.
the earlier end because they're kind of older. So for people that are on
Del
the old,
Boca Vista,
the
right,
Del
Jen?
Boca Vista. No, my parents aren't like that. But for anybody who's been watching the show from the beginning, they were here on my birthday when I was running last year, and I was introducing them as the least technologically capable people on the planet.
Right.
And as they came on, they could not figure out how to get their volume turned on.
Oh my goodness, not a good.
Jay
not a
and
good sign.
Deli. So we'll have them, and I'll have some other people come on that I think are like I'm going to see if I can get Alyssa to come on, and just some of my people that I would want to be in a cocktail party with on my birthday.
And if there's anybody that you would like to see come on Jen's 50th birthday, just if you want to give them a shout out on social media, say, hey, you definitely want to come on board.
And any content creators.
Yes, any content creators, anything that we could do. Because like I said, this is not me, us. We really do believe in that concept.
And so we are doing it as a
anything would be
fundraiser.
Push the concept.
Yeah.
forward.
So my birthday will be a fundraiser. All money that comes through, that will be a fundraiser for Gen Core specifically, but just so people realize, all money for generational change in any way, shape, or form goes into Gen Core, which is our
Correct.
local nonprofit. It is a 501c4. The only reason it's a 501c4 is because we do support candidates and we are politically affiliated. So we can't be, but I will have very open books. I know that's one of the things people don't like about the C4s.
And one of the things that we are going to do, guys, especially with any of your money that is funding any support for non-corporate candidates, we do want to hear from you, and we want to make sure that you do approve of who we support.
Yeah.
Not trying to single out anybody, but we all know the big fiasco with AOC recently. I think it's very important to have transparency.
No, and right now, first of all,
Very
right now,
important.
we have no money going out, just so people know.
No.
We just need some money coming in so we could like order some new t-shirts. Like we're not in a position to be donating to anybody, I assure you. But I have no problem with transparency. My books will always be open. I wouldn't accept money from people that I find not above board, and I wouldn't give money to people that I don't find above board. So that's neither here nor
Correct.
there. All of the money that's Gen Core goes to our volunteer stuff. So yes, it does buy tacos for Taco Tuesday. It does pay for me to have buckets and gloves for everybody to do the beach cleanup.
Sylvia has extra buckets and gloves for us to use tomorrow, just in case.
Excellent.
So, you know.
So like just things like that. So all the money for generational change right now is going to Gen Core, and it's all doing local change and trying to help things and build up our platform so that we can do more service. So
my
that's
birthday is on Thursday. We will see what
We'll do a
ultimately
mild
comes.
fundraiser for his
mild
birthday. He
fundraiser for
doesn't
my
get the
birthday.
big
We'll test the words.
fundraiser.
No, that's okay.
It's not a milestone birthday.
No, it's all right.
You're what, 39?
38.
38.
38.
38.
I ain't no kid no more, but
Nope,
I feel young.
38.
So we will continue this conversation on Thursday.
Who's coming on Thursday?
We don't know yet.
We have sort of it's a mystery situation.
Might be a big name. But
It could be, but it might not be. So we don't want to give that.
No promises. We'll see what ends up happening. In the meantime, we love you guys. We appreciate your support as always. Keep spreading the word on YouTube. We're also on Facebook. We are also on Spotify and Apple Podcast if you want to listen. And one last thing I will mention, and John, this one's for you, my friend. I highly encourage all of you to go to realprogressives.org and check out Jen's recent audio podcast with Steve Grumbine
On macro
of the
and
Macro
cheese.
and Cheese.
It was a great interview.
Fantastic podcast.
Yeah.
Tremendous, really incredible.
And check out the new website, guys. Let us know what you think. There are a couple of mistakes. I don't need someone like my mom proofreading it. We actually know that there's a couple things, but just in general, I think it's a really good flow to it. All of our change makers are on there with links to the interviews and links to their social media. It's a really good way to keep this connection going in the coalition we're building. And I did manage to get my bootlicker doghouse on there, so check that out.
We do not have to look very far for what the stories are going to be for Thursday. Our news and amuse is basically already covered. I can't even imagine what we might find in the next few days. But at this point, as of right now, we have
stuff.
4 significant stories.
All right, you're going to have to send them to me if you want me to do the graphics.
Well, I haven't sent it yet because I want to at least wait one more day
and see what
just in
others
case anything else might come out.
Well, things will always come out.
Absolutely. And so in the meantime, John, you're such a flatterer. So John thinks I'm 29. So that's nice. But in the meantime, we really appreciate you guys.
Then I'd really be old enough to be his mother.
Yeah. So have a wonderful evening. Really appreciate you all. And we will see you on Thursday.
Peace out.